In the last lesson, we talked through why growth wins. We went through 4 different reasons. The first, defensibility, how growth produces defensibility, which produces more growth. The second was resources, how growth attracts resources like capital and talent, which when applied produces more growth. The third was learnings, talking through how learnings compound on themselves because growth produces quicker and deeper learnings, which when applied produces more growth. And 4 is how growth compounds on itself when we implement and view growth through the right frameworks. So we know that growth wins, but the second big point that we need to talk to is how the game of growth has changed. There's 4 fundamental changes that have happened over the past 5 to 8 years that impact how we approach growing technology companies. And that first is that distribution has become a lot more competitive and expensive. So if we look at content marketing as an example, according to Profitwell, cost of customer acquisition with content marketing has increased 60% just in the last 5 years. We can also see headlines across news talking about how Facebook ad costs are increasing 43% or more on a quarter-by-quarter basis. We can even look at something like search in organic search results and see that SEO click-through rates are down 25 to 55% across both desktop and mobile. If we looked overall across all channels, across B2B and B2C companies, we can find that overall CAC is up 55 to 65%. So what is happening here? Well, we're seeing a few things have played out over the past 5 to 8 years. The first is by consolidation, the number of new major channels has massively decreased. The big players like Facebook and Google and Amazon acquire platforms before they can grow into their own new major channels. The second is that we're seeing tightening control of any new channels that do emerge, as well as the bigger platforms, in an effort to monetize. And then the third is that we're seeing the number of companies that are competing in these limiting channels increasing. So consolidation plus tightening control plus more companies competing in those limited channels equals higher costs and more competition. The second fundamental change that we've seen that impacts how we approach growth is that the life cycle of these channels and tactics has accelerated. We know that every tactic goes through a life cycle, where at the beginning the tactic is discovered and has a really high effectiveness. And as the few people who discover it, they optimize it, it reaches peak effectiveness, but then the tactic becomes adopted by the masses. And as it becomes adopted by the masses, users fatigue on the tactic and effectiveness decreases over time. We see that it's not only at a tactic level, but at a channel level as well. James Currier of NFX has posted this graphic a number of times where we can see that peak and valley of channels from early days of MySpace to Craigslist to Twitter to Facebook to iOS to Android to today Snap and Instagram and other platforms. They all grow through this same life cycle. The thing about these life cycles is that they're massively accelerating, meaning that they go through this life cycle in a much shorter period of time due to the increased competition and transparency. The third fundamental change that has impacted how we approach growth is that our access to data has increased as costs have decreased. So if we go back just 10 short years ago to 2008, what we find is that we pretty much had 3 options if we wanted to get serious about analytics. The first was Google Analytics, which really only measured analytics on web. The second is we had DoubleClick or other big enterprise products. Or third, we could build our own system. The costs were crazy high for the enterprise and the build your own option, and the Google Analytics option was heavily incomplete. But if we fast forward today and look at the analytics landscape, what we'll find is something similar to this. It's overwhelming, isn't it? We have so many options around analytics, and that's because companies have started to invest in it more, which has basically funded this analytics software ecosystem. But as more options has become available, the costs of getting data and this analysis have massively decreased, which has massively increased the accessibility that we have around data. More people in the organization today has data at their fingertips, which enables a couple different things. The first is deeper insights across the org at a much faster pace. We also see all of this data enabling things like mass personalization. Netflix has posted and written about how they personalize something as small as the image within the Netflix product that previews the show or the movie on a user-by-user basis, and how that mass personalization leads to more engagement. This data also enables even more complicated things like machine learning that we can apply to things like churn prediction and other models that feed growth. The fourth fundamental change that we've seen that impacts how we approach growth is that the lines of product marketing, engineering, and sales have massively blurred. So if we thought about an online chat product like Drift, which has grown immensely over the past couple of years, including raising a $50 million round from Sequoia, arguably the best venture investor in the world, what we find when we look at one of their main growth mechanisms is a 4-step loop. As a user signs up, a certain percentage of those users embed the product on their website. They embed the online chat product on their website. And as it's embedded on the website, thousands of people see that embedded chat and view that chat and see the Drift branding and click on the Drift branding, where they then come to Drift and either sign up on their own or they talk to the sales team and become customers themselves, repeating the loop over and over again. So if we look at this loop, would we call this product, engineering, marketing, sales? The key here is that all of those play a role in influencing and enabling this growth loop for Drift. The key point here is that product, tech, data, and design now play a much larger role in outcomes like acquisition, retention, and monetization. The problem is that we still think about these functions as silos. Marketing is separated from product, product is separated from sales, sales is separated from data, data is separated from design. Treating these functions as silos ends up in a lot of inefficiencies and friction. How many times does the marketing or sales team beg for engineering or product time, even though that we know engineering and product play a much larger role in marketing and sales outcomes? So the game has changed. We went through 4 fundamental changes that impact how we approach growth. 1, that distribution is more competitive and expensive. 2, the life cycle of channels and tactics has accelerated. 3, access to data has increased as costs have decreased. And 4, how product, data, eng, and design play a much bigger role in outcomes like acquisition, retention, and monetization. So we know that growth wins and that the game has changed and we need to change our approach. But what does that mean? We have a number of important questions that we need to answer, like how do we approach growth in a more competitive environment? How do we constantly evolve to a faster changing ecosystem? How do we use data and engineering to drive growth at scale? And how do we incorporate the growing role of product engineering and design in growth? Well, what we need to do is we need to build a system. And the 4 key elements of that system are that it's systematic, deterministic, sustainable, and repeatable. We're going to dive into detail on these points in the next lesson.